Hey guys, Jason Cadwell with the Where Do Homes Come From podcast, and here to do another episode. And today we're going to be talking about homeowners associations and what those look like and the components to that and how important they are to builders and developers when we're putting subdivisions together. And I have my friends with me, Tony Zola and Lisa Hafer, who are a son and mother duo that own HubCity Property Management.
Mm-hmm.
And so you guys do management with HOAs, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we do property management, HOA management, asset management. So if it's real estate, we'll manage it. Yeah.
Right on. How long have you been doing that?
So we started into property management in 2018, and then in 2021 we transitioned into HOA management as well. We still do both, and both have just been continuing to grow. And so, but yeah, HOAs really took off right around 2021.
Right on. Yeah, I know we've worked on a lot of subdivisions together as of late, and it's been really good. So, guys, I thought it'd be super important that we talk about the components to this and why an HOA management company is important and to that. So can you guys chat about that, of what are some of the beginning processes that builders and developers need to be understanding and talking about before they even develop their subdivision, and at what point should they be coming and talk to you?
Yeah. So I honestly think they should start talking to us at the beginning. There's a lot of things that we know from our experience that we can advise the builder or developer in that case, what to do with the CC&Rs. Talk to the attorney, give them some suggestions on things that'll make the HOA a community that people want to live in. There's a lot of things that maybe get put into CC&Rs that aren't practical in today's day and age, especially with like communication and stuff like that. So so I would say start from the beginning. We can sit down and just chat with them and, just have that candid conversation of here's what we see and here's what we think would be best to how to structure.
What are some of the problems and things that you want to stay away from?
So things like communication is a big thing. Also,
explain that further. What do you mean communication?
So a lot of communication in older HOAs is done via mail, and so a lot of CC&Rs have that, especially older HOAs. And that's something we work with the current HOAs to
specifically U.S. Postal communications.
U.S. Postal communication.
Notifications and things like that, rather than emails or other forms of communication.
So these were done so long ago that we didn't really have a lot of the technologies that we have today to be able to take advantage of it. So what you're trying to do is update those and make that so it's easier to communicate and get things done, more efficiency, like we talked about earlier, right?
Exactly, yeah. Correct. There's just so much that is now offered, not only in emails, but with like our software and the softwares that are out there to help with HOAs that, as long as we get that into those CC&Rs or even a resolution later on, just to update those where, USPS mail is not the primary. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, efficiency, like you said. Two, cost, because now we don't have to mail out, paper mail. Stamps are going up, things like that. Those little costs add to HOAs and in turn add to the fees.
So even that cost gets passed on to the homeowners at the end of the day, right? That's what they have to remember.
Yeah, it does. And like when we talk later about finances and budget and things like that, we'll hit on that a little bit on what that kind of structure is. But yeah, it does.
Cool.
There's that. And I just wanted to add to it is that really you have to understand from the developer standpoint, the jurisdiction, because each jurisdiction is going to require common areas, maybe bioswales, things like that. There's also, as developers know, that there's a requirement that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, anything over 3 to 4 houses, a true subdivision is going to have some kind of a drainage plan now in Oregon, and that kicks it into a common area, a bioswale, a drainage pond, as people call it, and then that kicks it into an HOA. And then your CC&Rs should address that. So those are some of the things, to put it in a nutshell.
I think that is a great point. And so just if I can recap that, is in the beginning design phases of a subdivision, you're going to know whether or not it's going to have some sort of drainage retention or what other components are to that, even at an engineering phase, you're going to know that, and that should be a red flag that says, hey, that's going to require somebody to monitor this. And for a while, it was where the cities and municipalities will actually take on those drainage swales and all of that. But now that's not the case anymore. And we're finding, so it seems that the need for an HOA is purely even just to take care of that.
Some, yes. And that has its own issues, because then bringing in an HOA, homeowners association, then requires insurance, requires a specific counting, requires things that where the homeowner association has to comply with ORS 94. Well, most homeowners, sorry to say, don't understand that process.
And why should they?
Exactly.
They're not going to.
Exactly. Nor do they want to be involved in that. So then that brings in landscaping and management, which are one of the major expenses. And so then that brings in the need for the budget. So it just keeps going that even though it's a small HOA of like the 8 homes in Tigard, they had a common area. They had a bioswale, and they had a common road.
Shared driveway.
Yeah. Common is the key word.
Yep.
And so brings in more expenses. People say, well, why? Why should we have an HOA? We only have 8 houses. We only have 20 houses. Well, the developer does not get to dictate that. That is the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's the key point for people to understand is it's a matter of the powers that be, if you will, versus the developer or builder. Guaranteed, the builder and developer does not want to, they don't want to deal with this because it's added expense for them.
Well, and it's also a loss of a lot. A lot or two.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
always is.
The housing supply doesn't, be maximized in that HOA.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what are the things that come into play with when you're dealing with the HOAs and you're talking to builders? What are they saying that they want to see, what they don't want to see? What kind of feedback are you guys getting?
From builders specifically?
From builders or developers, whatever it may be, yeah.
That's a good question, I think, because a lot of our feedback comes directly from the homeowners and the associations.
But by that time, it's too late, right? Before it's created. And so is it more so, does a builder really, quote, care much? Or is it a matter of they're just following the rules that are being laid before them with the municipalities?
I think with the builder, it's really the rules that were set up with the developer. If they're not if the builder's not the developer, then they have to follow that as far as architectural guidelines, things like that, if those are included in there. So really lot maintenance, that kind of thing. Really they're looking at, how can they build in this subdivision around with these rules that are there, that are already in place.
I believe from the feedback that we've had, the builder and the developer truly does not want to get into that business. That's not what they're there for. They don't appreciate restrictions any more than a homeowner does.
Sure.
If you want to look at it that way. But then on the other hand, keeping the yards mowed and things like that while the house is up for sale or sitting there as a model home or whatever is advantageous, that's some of the things that I believe the builders and the developers don't quite also follow the whole process of when is it developer owned, when is it HOA owned, when's the transition? We can go into that.
I was just actually going to, I think that's a great transition, because that was going to be my question, is talk about transition. So there's a 50 lot subdivision that's put together, and then you have homes that are being sold. The first 10 at a time are being sold. We have homeowners now living in those houses. Now what happens? Is there a gray area on who is actually responsible? Is the homeowner paying into the HOA now? What is that looking like? What's that transition look like? What does that whole mess look like?
Quick answer is yes and no, but I think you want to speak to that.
Yeah, and a little bit more on the budget side of things. So when we talk with the developer and get things started and they retain our services, we'll sit down and we will do a budget for them based on their HOA. And not only just that, but based on other industry standards that we see and costs associated to like maintain drainage ponds, bioswales, that kind of thing. Are there parks? Are there not? Are there street lights? Does the HOA pay for those street lights? Do they not? Different
There's a
things
term
like
actually,
that.
real quick,
So,
term for that. A lot of that's called reserve study. Isn't that right?
So,
Or what are you calling that when
Yeah.
when you
This
do
is the
that?
initial
So there's
budget.
there's two things: initial budget and then reserve study. And the reserve study does come into play with the budget on how much the HOA should be taking out of the operating costs to save for later. So
Mhm.
reserve study is essentially going through and saying, here's a list of everything that will need to be replaced at some point. That's the responsibility of the HOA. And so we're going to assign a value to it in today's dollars, and then we're going to forecast that out and say, okay, this has a lifespan of 10 years. This has a lifespan of 15 years.
Okay.
And then we're going to have to pay for that replacement down the road. And so that's, based on that dictates how much out of that operating budget you want to pull out and put into the reserve account. That's not saying that down the road in 10 years, you're going to replace the mailboxes, or 15 years or whatever, whatever that is HOA property that you have to replace. That's not saying that you will, but you might have some maintenance. And so once that reserve account is funded to a point that can cover all those potential expenses, then you can look at decreasing that amount that goes towards the reserve.
And that is part of the initial budget consideration.
But that's part of the initial overall plan that you have to put together, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so, so kind of on the budget side of things so we'll do that budget, get that initial budget going. That will dictate what HOA fees will be for new buyers coming in.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So the transition I think that you hit on goes back to the CC&Rs again. Bylaws or CC&Rs. Don't ask me why, I'm not an attorney, why some have bylaws and CC&Rs, or why some it's just all included in the CC&Rs.
Sure.
Tomato, tomato. It's the governing docs, as we call them. Whatever governs that association when it was created by the developer will tell you in there, is it turned over to the homeowners association that's newly created and appointed by the developer at 50% of the lots sold. It's always lots sold, or 100% of the lots sold. We see everything in between. It reminds me of the fact that you need to know the CC&Rs, especially as the management company, to start tapping the developer and say it's time to turn over. Until the developer turns that over and deeds over those bioswales or that common area property, then there is no homeowners association. Therefore, to answer your question about when do you start paying, it's kind of a negotiation thing with the developer. And we have to make sure that the developer understands that there's money in the account to pay for the expenses until that's turned over. In a slower real estate cycle, it may take a while.
Sure.
In a quick real estate cycle, we all may be scrapping to get a new board in there when people are still moving into their home.
Right.
So there's no one.
Yeah, I think that's good, especially at the time
answer.
when this is being recorded, is the market slowed down some. And so it's going to take a little more time for those things to get done. Every subdivision is going to be a little bit different, but that's something to keep in mind. So what regarding all of that, if a realtor is selling a new home in a subdivision that's being completed and what have you, what kind of questions should they be asking? Should they be reaching out to you guys, find out who the HOA manager is and be reaching out and asking questions? What should realtors be doing as part of their sales process when they're helping a buyer?
You want to handle that one?
Yeah, so I think obviously the budget, they can get a copy of that so they understand what fees or what's going to be in the HOA that the HOA is responsible for. That's a great way to get a snapshot of it. Also to understand why the assessment is what it is, because there's a lot of other things, we have to educate homeowners often. And just like telling them, look, there's more to an HOA than just that little strip of grass or that bioswale. There's liability insurance, there's landscaping, there's tax prep, there's things like that go into it that all has a line item to it. And so that increases those fees, unfortunately, but it's part of what's required, because the jurisdiction put that on them for a bioswale or something like that. So I would say that, and then also, where are we at in the turnover process? Obviously, if you're the first or second home in a subdivision, you can pretty much tell like, okay, we're not to that turnover. But, asking whether or not that's a 50% turnover or 75%, lots sold, we turn it over, I think is a good thing, because then people will be able to say, okay, do I want to be on that committee? And there's a transitional committee that is developed or established right before it gets fully turned over, that can work with the builder or the developer, actually in that case, during that interim period of lots being sold. So those are two main big questions I would. Also, the other is, obviously a copy of the CCNRs and bylaws, and and getting a quick because in there that's going to say things like, lawn restrictions, architectural restrictions, hey, you can't build that shed out front or on the side, things like that,
A lot of times there's some questions on interpretation of that, right? That we get, and I think I send buyers your guys' way a lot, because they ask a question. I go, you know what? Just ask the management company, so that way they can help interpret that. Because again, lots of CCNRs are written by attorneys, and that legalese gets confusing at times. One of the things we really try to do is, and I would encourage anybody who's helping a buyer purchase one home, or if you're a realtor working with a home builder, try to get those documents out up front as much as possible. And we really do that. We have a builder's package that has the entire, and most of our builder's package is 3 big documents. One of them is the home builder's warranty, but the second is the HOA and bylaws, right? Or excuse me, the CCNRs and the bylaws. And so that ends up being a whole bunch of stuff, but we make sure that there's the budget that's on there, right? It gives all that information, right, that you're talking about. And so I think that's super helpful if agents would ask their sales reps, hey, what are these? Do you have these packages, whatever? So they're not bugging you as much.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that's super important that we really try to get ahead of.
Yeah. And also too, just, we sold real estate too. And before we got full time into management, I would ask your buyer, what is your intent of the home? Like, what is it you want to do? Do you want to paint it certain colors? Do you
want chickens?
Do you want chickens in the back?
Big time, right?
Do you want a shed in the back?
With the cost of eggs right now, right? Everybody's wanting a chicken.
Right.
Yeah.
And can you do it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you do it? Because like a good example is, a lot of people have this misinterpretation of, well, it only pertains to the front of my house, the front and painting or whatever, things that people can see from the road.
That the backyard's off, that's their domain.
Their domain,
you can do
whatever they want. Well, turns out that if you want a shed, and if it's visible, and it's not even if it's visible, if you just want a shed, it's going to have to meet certain architectural requirements for the subdivision. So, paint, style, roof line, siding, things like that, so. Yeah.
And that's a really good place to transition into, I know that the purposes of your podcast are, where do houses come from, when we're making this centric to development and people buying in new subdivisions and the transition. But we have a big share of realtors that are coming to us for information of when a house turns over in an HOA.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And so at that point, there's probably more documents established by the boards that have been in place. They're called resolutions, that outlines that a little bit. An architectural control committee usually is appointed that would be addressed in the CCNRs. So I understand, having sold real estate for 30 years, I understand that no buyer wants to go through that thick of a package.
Yes. They want the highlights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want the Chat GPT version.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And nor does it all make sense, and that's okay. And so you were asking from the perspective of a realtor is that the realtor really needs to learn that the CCNRs and what's in those CCNRs, if they can, is going to dictate the life of the buyer in the HOA.
Sure.
To some extent.
Absolutely.
And like Tony said,
Yeah.
find out what's important to them. Talk to them. Is HOA important? If it's not, some people actually really want HOAs because they do contribute to keeping the property values up, and that's another conversation we can have. But some people will never buy in HOAs, or some people will never give up their chickens.
It's interesting how many conversations I have with buyers that call and said, does this have an HOA? And I'm like, yeah, it does. I will never live in one.
Yep.
It's because they did have an experience that wasn't great before.
Yeah.
Correct.
They had the, for the better term, a Karen in a place that
Right.
complained about everything, whether it was legitimate or not, and made it a not fun experience for them.
Right.
Right.
And so they're like, I'm not going to do that. Or they have the architectural committee person who is over measuring the grass
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
saying, that kind of thing. So
Right.
when you get to places that they have super big restrictions like that taints the whole idea of an HOA with people,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and it puts a bad taste in their mouth. And like, I just don't want to do that. But
Right.
there's something to be said that there's a lot of good that comes of that as well. Of
There
that
is.
way, I always tell people, look, that the whole design of an HOA is to help keep the area fairly uniform, and it helps you police your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what you don't want to do is, you don't want, if somebody moves in and hey, they're great people, but they got crap all over their front yard.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to live next to that.
Yeah.
And so versus you being the bad guy, the
Mhm.
HOA gets to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
To be able to help control that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And another thing too is
Mhm.
like, size of streets. I think some of that is changing a little bit in some of the new development code, but for widening them a tad bit. But, there's some HOAs that have really narrow streets.
Sure.
And so like, amount of cars that are parked on the street, trailers especially too. It can get very cumbersome just to navigate to your house.
And so people want to park in the front yard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And growing up on a farm, I don't have a problem with that, but it does not increase property values to have people
Right.
parking in front
Well,
yards.
there's a time and place for all of that.
Exactly.
Is what you're
And-
getting at.
And really it comes down to like all that things that are related with the street or even stuff in the front yard. It's storage, it's like,
Yeah.
really addressing that you can't store certain items, on the street, like extra cars, extra trailers, things like that,
Yeah.
or, stuff on the side of your house, all
And-
that. So,
I will just put in, even though I'm not an HOA person, quote unquote, I will put in a plug for HOAs, and seeing this in real estate and seeing this now from our, because we see every deed that's transferred into
Mhm.
the HOA, because that's part of process in closing. The houses that are in HOAs that are taken care of, where the HOA is very active, and I don't mean active in a Gestapo manner,
Yeah.
mhm.
are the ones that sell the quickest, and there is a better resale value.
Yeah, I think we see
and
that a lot,
time.
and the
Mhm.
neighborhoods continue to be desirable, and so how do you help with that? So I think that's part of it, is how do you help make the HOA more desirable
Mhm.
from that perspective, right? What are
Right.
some of not necessarily amenities, but how is it that you're taking an approach? Because I know you've taken over some other homeowners association groups
Mhm.
or other neighborhoods that were
Uh-huh.
managed by other people.
Mhm.
Mhm.
What are some of the things you guys got to bring to the table that others weren't doing to make it actually a better overall experience for everybody?
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's very simple. It's communication. It's having that communication with the homeowners, letting them know that, we're here, and when they call, we do answer the phone, or, they leave a message, and we'll return that call to help them with whatever that issue might be.
Understand why they got a violation.
Right.
We aren't the Gestapo. We function at the direction of the board,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of communication in the board meetings, and even in behind the scenes
Mhm.
where it's appropriate with the board. And so we want the homeowners to understand that we're here to help them and help the board interpret the CCNRs for whatever those rules or regulations may be. We do understand, though, that we're not the favorite people, because we are the ones that are sending them the
Sure.
notes that they need to get rid of their whatever, their RVs or this or that. And that's, sometimes I don't agree with it. But again, it is an HOA. It has governing documents. It has a board of directors that, most of everybody on the board takes their
Mhm.
job very seriously. And there's a structure there to it. So what do we bring is, I think that we help the board and the homeowners understand why some of these things are happening. We also help with, collecting the fees and helping with the budget and paying the bills and
Mhm.
working with the landscaper when they blow leaves off of the common area into somebody else's yard. We're the ones that
You get the call.
we take
Mhm.
care of those
Yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's just just kind of depends on what we bring to the table as on what's of a value to that person who's asking that question.
Sure.
To
When you talk about homeowners association boards, what should people know about the responsibility of being on that board, and what does that look like?
Yeah, you want to answer that one?
Sure. I deal with the boards most of the time. Tony is the budget whiz. So again, back to the governing documents, bylaws usually, or CCNRs that tell what the board terms are and different things like that. What a person should know if they want to serve on the board. I think the biggest thing biggest miscommunication is that the board gets to do whatever they want. I hear that a lot. The board, and I'm not saying that there aren't boards out there, and please, everybody that's listening to this, we're giving generalized answers. There's been a lot of boards that have been not good boards that we have seen. There's a lot of boards. There is subdivisions that do have grass height. And while I don't go out there and measure the grass, I still have to send out violations. So,
sure,
what I'm trying to say is we're giving some generalized answers of this. But to serve on the board, what do you need to know? You need to really understand that there is structure to that. The board just does not get together usually and just make up rules. They don't get together and single out someone because they don't like.
They're not a secret organization that's just trying to work behind the scenes.
Right.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, because that's the thing is if you're following the CCNRs, there's a rule for when you're supposed to announce those board meetings. Those board meetings have to take place. There has to be a quorum, which means has to be a majority of the people that are sitting on the board there.
Okay.
The decisions have to be voted on. Again, if you're following the bylaws and CCNRs. If you're not, every homeowner has the right to come to those meetings and call the board on it and say, based on the CCNRs, you're not doing this correctly. I know the boards out there that are listening to now are saying, Lisa, shut up, but but that is the truth.
But I mean, that's just the real deal.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you typically calculate the dues? I know the board helps with that. You guys are putting that together, but how is that done, and how are votes cast to be able to raise dues, lower dues? How does all that work?
Yeah, we start with a draft budget, and we send that. We get everything. If it's a new HOA, there's going to be some parts in that where we're pulling from other HOAs that we see fees commonly being. Once an HOA has a year under its belt, then we can pull from those actual costs that, hey, this is what we actually spent. This is how much money we actually pulled in. This is how many delinquents that we have on average throughout the year. All those things have to be taken into account in order to create the budget. And so a good way in anything with budget creation, whether it's HOA or your business, is, estimate lower on your income, estimate a little higher on your expenses. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the year, when reality actually comes through, then you should be right at that mark of almost net zero on your operating. We generally try to run our budgets with a little bit of income at the end of the year. And by little, I mean, it could be $50, it could be $500. That's with also keeping in account or taking into consideration the reserve study that gets done, and the money that gets pulled out of that operating into the reserve. So, you can run it at, like, at the end of the year, we want to see a zero sum budget or maybe a little bit of extra. Regardless, the reserve study and all the expenses and everything are calculated into that. So, and as far as like increasing fees, that draft budget goes before the board, and then any homeowners that are there can make comments on it, give their kind of feedback on it. And then the board will decide to approve it or deny it. And really, it's not an outright denial. It's more, hey, we want to see this changed, or, you know what, we're not going to do, a community event. We're going to try to save some money. Let's say, so we're going to do less or more here or there based on what the vision of the board is for that upcoming year. And then we'll adjust it accordingly. And then, the board will vote on it and approve it. So.
Is there any typical like special assessments or anything like that might pop up that have to be you're like, guys, you have no choice.
Right.
This is something you have to do.
I'm not going to say that from time to time a special assessment won't be needed. There are some HOAs out there, especially more in condo associations, where a special assessment, gets levied for things that are more related to that unit. We've seen that in the past, but really with this, so it's ORS 94, right, that governs it. So ORS 94 with the reserve study, the intent of that is to not have special assessments. I'm not going to say that in the future there might not be,
Sure.
because big things happen, and you have to pay for them, especially if your reserve isn't upkept. But the idea of the reserve study is to look ahead, see those items that the HOA is responsible for, and save for them. So that way, when it does come due or something big happens, they have the money for that. So, special assessments, they do have their place, but it's hopefully covered by the reserve.
Gotcha. You hit on something a second ago and about delinquencies and that whole thing. So for the most part, how are people typically paying for, if you have I'm going to just call it a $600 a year HOA, that's $50 a month, right? How are people paying for that? Or how do you assess them? How does all that work?
Yeah. So it just depends on how the board, if there's resolutions, or kind of go back to the CCNRs of when we will send out the invoice, essentially. So if it's a yearly assessment, it's sent out once a year. If it's quarterly, monthly. So it really just depends on the HOA and how they want to function. As far as people paying, if it's a yearly one, then they have to pay, each CCNRs are a little bit different, but usually they have like a 30 to 60-day grace period before late fees and interest start being applied. So it's advantageous for those people to pay that upfront, as soon as possible to avoid those fees. Others that are quarterly or monthly, they will send in a check monthly. We also have an online system that collects those payments as well. And they can set up auto pay. They can just kind of set it and forget it kind of thing, and so that's generally how that goes about. And, we get everything from online payments to checks to bill pays,
So what if somebody, they're like, you know what, I've just had a bad experience with you, with the HOA, and I'm just pissed off. And I'm like, screw you, I'm not paying my fees.
Yeah.
What happens?
It's not smart. So, because I do all the accounting side of things. So interest and late fees will accrue. Usually it's generally every 30 days for HOAs. That gets spendy.
And what does that look like? I mean, just for when you say spendy, on average, what's a 30-day late?
So
assessment?
It could be anywhere, late fee could be anywhere from $10 to $25.
And that is the board's decision and discretion.
Okay. So there's a board discretion
as far
there.
as as long as it's applied uniformly.
Right.
Yeah. And then you have a 1% interest that's applied on that as well. And so it just continues to rack up, especially if you are, if you're a quarterly or monthly, HOA that pays, then every month, not only do you owe dues, but now you owe late fees and interest. And then, okay, that goes 30 more days. Now you owe late fees and interest on your other dues and everything else that's outstanding. And so it can.
So you have dues, and then this month you get a late fee of $25. So let's say your dues were $100 for, or in my case, it was $50 a month, right?
Yeah.
It's 50. Now that you have a $25 late fee, now you owe $75.
Yeah.
Right. And so you go another $75 or $75. There's an interest accrued on that. And then the next month, there's another $25 added plus interest, right? That just can keep adding up.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. In conjuncture, if it's a monthly, the monthly $50 that's owed, right? So, and some that are yearly, it's just that one lump sum, and then it just carries on for, we've seen upwards of 6 to 8 months, before someone will pay.
Or longer.
So I want to sell my house. I'm pissed off at the neighborhood for some reason. And there's a story I'll tell you here in a second of kind of how this happened, but I'm mad at my neighborhood. I'm selling my house and I'm just not paying my fees. Even at closing, I'm not paying my fees.
No, even at closing, huh?
Yeah. So what happens?
So I haven't seen that at closing. Have you?
Well, so here's a good. We'll just get our.
I don't think the sale would go through.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we'll get our realtor hats on here.
Yes.
How could that possibly be? As a realtor, you're sitting there and they're saying, "I'm not paying that." What's the title company going to tell them? We can't insure title if there's any kind of cloud, as we used to call it.
So it's a lien.
Yeah.
Effective lien.
It's an effective lien.
Yeah, and you can't transfer title.
And that's what I wanted to get at.
Yeah,
Okay.
Is so literally I had this happen long ago. It's not in a HOA that you guys manage, but particular party was in some had some health and financial stuff going on, didn't pay their HOA fees, and the daily rate that was accruing, and it goes back to
some are like that,
where they already had these things set up because I think they probably had other problems, right? So the board changed the assessment, the late fee assessment, and made it a daily rate, and ended up getting to a problem where they were like, well, I'm just going to sell, I'm selling my house, I'm still not going to pay it. Well, you can't, right? It's a lien. And in fact, my understanding is even if a house is foreclosed on, ultimately, if you went to that point, the HOA must be paid to transfer title.
Yeah, I've never been able to get that 100% because I know that if it actually goes to foreclosure sale, as we know in real estate, everything drops off except for taxes in the first position.
Yeah, and what I was told, and this is what I was told by the HOA manager at the time.
Yeah.
And so whether that's true or not, I'm just, again, guys, I'm going down a whole different rabbit trail right now. But the point of that is you'd want to check, and I think even goes to putting our real estate hats on, not necessarily new construction, but if you're looking at even a foreclosure property or you're buying a house from the courthouse steps, you better go find out all of the liens and clouds on that title, because there could be that as well.
Right.
And you might have an HOA who said, look, we're going to make sure that, we're going into some weird times right now. I don't know that Oregon's necessarily going to have this problem, but there could be some foreclosures or types of things happening in other parts of the country. We'll see. But if people aren't paying their HOA dues, that's just one more thing on top.
It's a valid point, because in addition to what Tony was talking about, there are legal remedies available for the HOAs, much the same as anybody else who has a claim. They can file legal liens. They can have an attorney go after that and get a judgment. Those things will then affect the real estate transaction and other real estate transactions for property they have that they may want to sell prior to selling that house.
Yeah.
So it is a rabbit trail in a way for the purposes of this, but it's good to point out that it's not just about the current dues and the late charges, the HOA associations, because if you can imagine some associations that have condominiums, for example, that have $250 to $500 a month fees, because those pay for common areas and, and
exterior maintenance, all that stuff.
That if someone goes 2 or 3 years without paying, or 4 or 5, as we've seen, and then decides to sell their house, it's a lump sum. Well, the condo association needs that money in their budget. That's one thing that, those, or the HOA, they really need that money coming in, because they're not in the business to make money. They don't have a big buffer all the time. So that's the one reason why there is the legal remedies to go farther beyond just us sending them an email every month with late charge.
I think that's a great point, is people to remember that HOAs are put in place to take care of things, to maintain a neighborhood or units or communities, if you will. They're not a moneymaker, right? These are not a profit center for anyone necessarily. Yes, there's management costs and fees that are there, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned, it's just a matter of, here's the cost of getting things done, here's the cost of getting landscaping, the maintenance on the drainage areas, whatever it may be, and again, you give a little bit of a buffer, but it's in the big scheme. And that's what people, I want to just debunk that myth that a lot of people sometimes think that the HOA is just making a bunch of money and what have you.
Yeah, it's not a for-profit. And I will tell you this from our experience, the board of directors, even if they have a surplus at the end of the year, like let's say a bunch of delinquent people paid or everyone paid on time and, maybe they didn't have as many costs or whatever, they will either put that extra money into the reserve so that way homeowners don't have a special assessment down the road, or they'll throw you like a barbecue. We have an HOA that has a community events, line item in their budget, and they buy, food for everyone in the community.
And we actually even had one board that reduced their fees.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what people want to hear too, I think, so much, especially in our political environments, everything else. Everybody just says costs up, 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 up.
Yeah.
So hearing that there actually is opportunities for, and not a guarantee, by the way, but there's opportunities that people will take to be able to reduce actually the costs, if at all possible.
And that's part of the hat we wear too. I just want to make that clear. As a third party, management company, we're looking at, well, hey, this landscaper over here, he's doing it cheaper and as good or better a job.
Yeah.
Perhaps you need to talk with him, and get a bid from them on this to see if that's something that'll lower their cost. That's part of the hat that we wear to make sure that, fees don't go up. I will say that fees over the last, about 3 to 5 years or so have gone up generally, as everything has, and so it's good to be aware, like when it's the right time to increase fees for the right reasons, and also say, okay, well, hey, we're at a good spot. We're not going to, let's go ahead and push that out a year or two, if and then reevaluate, and have the board reevaluate that. And that's some advice that we give the HOAs as well too.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing on the delinquents I did want to talk about too is if a HOA, so because we're talking about fees and stuff, if an HOA has a high amount of delinquents, they're not making money, right? And I'm not saying for profit. They're not bringing money in to pay for things.
To be sustainable.
To be sustainable, just to maintain. That's why an HOA exists, right? Is to maintain the community spaces and the neighborhood. If a whole bunch of people in an HOA are not paying, that board of directors is going to have to increase the fees. And so I just want to make that point there is like, as a homeowner, don't be that homeowner that doesn't pay your fees, because if you continue to do that, well, then the only remedy the board has is to increase their fees on everybody else that's paying to make ends meet.
Which in hindsight will raise them back on you. Anyway.
Raise them back on you.
Exactly.
And then there's more fees and more late fees and interest charge and everything. So I just put that out there just to say is like, sometimes it's a necessity because people aren't paying.
Sure.
And so they're like, hey, man, we have 10 people that still did not pay and are refusing to pay. Now, there's remedies to that. And like, we can talk about that briefly of like going down collections and liens and things like that, which, isn't a very fun topic. But, at the end of the day, you're part of the community. You need to be part of the community. And part of that is paying the fees to help keep those fees down.
For sure. Sure. What are some of the amenities that people are looking for? Like they're asking you, hey, new subdivisions coming in or additional phases, whatever. What kind of questions are they asking you? Are they going to say, hey, is there going to be parks, pools, trails? What are people asking for, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, I think that especially like in one recently, the Callaway Creek one out there by Adair, new homeowners, the ones that are purchasing in the new phase, they're asking, are we a part of this HOA?
Yeah.
Are we able to play on the playgrounds? And so on the flip side too, is like we get some people that are already in the current HOA going, well, are they part of our HOA too? Well, do they get to play at the playground kind of thing? So we get some of those questions back and forth. And, at the end of the day, in that kind of scenario, it's going to be beneficial for that HOA to bring in more people, and because it'll stabilize those HOA dues,
I think that to answer your question, when we hear from buyers, or mostly buyers, realtors, they're wanting to know what they have to do to get through the transaction, the purchase of that, because especially in a fast market, they're willing to accept terms of an HOA sometimes, so they can get the house, rather than argue with what might be, is this a better HOA? Is this, this house doesn't have an HOA, making those comparisons or whatever. But so we hear a lot from the realtors as to well, what really financially is going to, how is this going to be an impact?
Sure.
Those are some of the things too, as well. I think because we're just one step removed from the realtors, maybe the realtors are hearing different things, but when it comes to us, we, we can really only provide financial and CCNRs or tell them how to get those documents. And
Sure.
that might be part of it too, is that, by the time it gets to us, we're not getting too much questions. I think Tony's answers are really spot on.
Yeah.
About the only answers we get that are not document related, or questions we get that are not document related.
Got you. We were talking earlier about that you're seeing some phasing out of amenities such as pools and things like that. What's going on in that world?
It's really cost. It's cost and liability. I think some developers are starting to recognize that, while it's a nice thing to attract people to potentially purchasing in an HOA or a condo association, they're also starting to get some feedback that, well, those pools add to that HOA assessment. And so liability goes up, insurance, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. And then, heaven forbid, like a pool the concrete doesn't set right and it cracks. And then you got a pool that's leaking and, it's just an ongoing thing. So as an attractant, yeah, I think that's a fun thing to have. But also developers are faced with cost. Now drainage ponds are being imposed, on these developers for the runoff of the city streets and the roof lines and all that. So that way it filters the water. I mean, when you just start adding in extra things to a developer, something's going to have to go, unfortunately. And so that's amenities, but a lot of developers are still trying to at least, hey, we can do a park, or we can do a grassy area with some trees, something like that, to at least make it
parks, basketball court, type of thing,
volleyball, just something that's low maintenance, easy to put in for them, adds value, but doesn't increase substantially the HOA assessments. I have a friend that lives in a condo up in Sherwood, and they have a pool that's outdoor. And this is the other part too, is I think, if we're just talking specifically pools, but also other amenities, is like indoor, outdoor. If it's outdoor, it's not being used 9 months out of the year.
Depends on the location, right? Yeah. Oregon, where we're at, you don't get to use it a lot. If some others, if you're in Texas or Arizona, Sunbelt,
that would definitely
they're going to use that a bunch more.
Yeah, and that would be a deciding factor to those buyers. Absolutely, it would be for me.
Yeah.
So it's just.
If I was in Arizona, I'd want a pool.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So
I'd probably want one in my backyard.
Yeah, it's that trade off.
Yeah, got you. Kind of finishing this up a little bit. What are some things that you would love for realtors first to know more about HOAs, if there is anything more? And again, even for home buyers coming in to HOAs, is there anything else that we haven't hit on that they should really know about?
Do you want me to
lead
into that one?
Yeah.
I think from the office work that we see in the background of a real estate transaction or changing owners, again, there is a fair amount of work that we do for every sale. There is put on my realtor hat here. There is a addendum that has come into place in the last couple of years that is a page and a half, 2 pages long, that has the ability for the buyer to check every box on it if they want, minutes going back 2 years, things like that. And depending on the association, depending on how long we've managed, transfer of records, those documents may not all be available.
May or may not be there.
I can tell you majority of those documents on that addendum probably are not. If the association has been in a certain mindset and they have a web page and take the money to service that web page and provide those documents, it's probably on the web page.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. It's like, just because there's an addendum provided to the seller's agent does not mean that all those and the buyer wants those documents because the realtor is trying to do a good job. Does not mean that those documents are always available. So that's one thing that
so they can ask in one hand and get something in the other.
Yeah, and
reality is different than
exactly. And
yeah.
It goes back to the documents that Tony had talked about. Really, how is it going to impact the buyer the most? Besides amenities, is financial.
Mhm.
So if the realtor can understand that they need, or the buyer can have the financial knowledge, then and that would be the CC&Rs, the bylaws. Those are provided by title. I know that the CC&Rs are. Right.
Yes.
In a new builder pack, you stress
we give them up
what that
front, but
was.
we every title report is supposed to have them. And these days, everything's an e-pre, if you will, right? So
Mhm.
basically, everything has a link to go to those documents that you should be
Right.
getting. And
Right.
realtors, if you're listening to this,
Right.
please get that separate PDF out of there and get it to your agents or your clients, please. Don't just send them the report, because the client doesn't know what to do with those.
Yeah.
So just please do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. So that's kind of the answer to your question,
Yeah.
is making sure that the brokers know what would impact the buyer, where to get it, how to give it to the buyer, and the fact that some things are just not going to be available within it, especially within a 3-day time frame from our office. Let me tell you that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like even resolutions too. Like a board of directors might not have done any resolutions in the last year.
Sure.
We've had brokers say, well, where's, resolutions from the last year, and not understand that there's been no resolutions. Like what is given is is what we have, So not all the times is it, they're not doing extra work if they don't have to, right? The board of directors. So yeah.
What are some if you were going to give advice to another homeowners association management company,
Mm-hmm.
or people needing to set this up in other places, what kind of advice would you give them on some of the best practices to do there?
Want me to
Yeah.
take that one? So I don't want to talk down to anybody, so I'm not trying to say that, but the very basic is to know what responsibilities a homeowner association in general have, and that would start with ORS 94.
So
So-
your state statutes,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Oregon or whatever, we have hopefully a whole U.S. audience here.
Mm-hmm.
So their state statutes will dictate
Yeah.
what that's about.
Yes.
Okay.
It should.
Yep.
It should. I can't speak for other states, but I would imagine that
There's some governing body somewhere that has their
Yes.
pulse on that
Yes.
to provide guidance. Okay.
and everybody's a Google expert, so that's where I would start with that. If you're starting in with an HOA association, and you don't have a management company that is able to give you this information, I think that was kind of where your question was
Yeah. And
going.
I think one of the things I liked about what you were saying too, and wanted to point out, I guess, is the ability to get information quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning, by creating some sort of website or database or places where people can go to get access to that information,
True.
versus having to call you every single time.
True. So yeah, then that can be twofold, and I'll try to put it real succinctly, is that us as a management company, we want to provide that service of that communication, figuring out what documents are really necessary for the board to create, where they're going to be stored, where do they live. Part of our contract is to keep those documents, and for a period of 6 years.
Okay.
Don't ask us for the documents back 6 years, please. But the point is that, yes, can the board afford a website? Can they afford someone who can service that website so that that's timely, that those
Sure.
documents are uploaded timely and all inclusive? And going back to your question about new boards or boards that maybe aren't functioning with a management company that want to take this on, again, that's going to help them a lot, is to figure out, do they want to do a website? Do they have someone who holds those documents? In ORS 94, just quickly, it says that at the end of every fiscal year, they are within 30 days. I could be misquoting, but generally within 30 days, they're supposed to send out a year-end profit and loss to all of their homeowners.
Sure.
So they know, because it is very important, transparency. When they approve the budget for the coming year, that is supposed to be given to the homeowners as well. So document storage, document retrieval, document communication, you know where I'm going with all this. It's
absolutely.
It's a system that the board has to figure out if they want to be compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, love it.
And then also, like, ARC committees, different types of committees that you may want to have, to enforce the rules or to approve, certain color changes or whatever have you, or landscaping to a property, deciding whether or not they want to have those committees on there as well is something that
Well,
they
that
need
determines. I mean, yeah, the architectural review committee
to.
could be important in
Right.
multiple types of subdivisions, right? It could be if you have a subdivision that one builder owns it, he's doing all the thing, then he's going to be that, right? There, that really doesn't come into play as much from the actual house build.
Right.
But if you have a place where you're going to have lots of custom homes, right? That could really
Yeah.
be different where each homeowner is building their own individual home.
Yeah.
You can have to have some restraints or some confines, if you will, of what to be in with that.
True. Yes. And then and after the initial purchase and all that, if on resale, if somebody comes in, buys a house and sees different types of fences and they don't particularly like the fence they have, they tear it down, build a new fence, that could be what they call architectural review committee violation. There could be a fine in there up to $250 or more for that, simply because they did not ask for permission. Again, I don't write the CCNRs, but that's something that we probably could have covered a little better, I think, as far as
we could have covered a lot of stuff with this, right?
right?
We could go down so many topics.
I think that's something that would affect any buyer in the future of understanding that there's an art committee that they need to talk to.
Yeah.
Need to not talk to maybe, but to submit a form.
For sure.
Yeah. And then also what I would say to any new boards or boards that are self-managing or people that are thinking to be on a board is, if you don't have management, you're going to have to understand bookkeeping and accounting. There are bills that need to be paid by the association. Things need to be paid timely as well. And so, that's just understanding that you're going to have to not only take money in, how to go about that process in a transparent way, but also to turn around and pay those bills out that are needed in a timely manner on behalf of the association. And so, making sure that the secretary and president, people that are on the bank accounts, all that kind of stuff, are doing their job regularly. And so part of that I would say is another thing is just understand the amount of time that is, required if you're going to be on a board or you're going to, have an HOA. That's, a little plug for us is that's why we're here.
Right.
We do all that and keep it transparent. We give out board reports every month of the financials, everything from soup to nuts, from profit and loss, balance sheets, delinquent reports, bank reconciliations, all that kind of stuff, And then on the flip side too, is if people aren't paying, trying to communicate to people before it goes down one of the routes that we don't want to go down. I mean, it's a lot easier to go about that. And then the final thing too is like understand that you're going to be dealing with your neighbors. And so, if you're the person that's going around enforcing rules and asking for money, you might not be as well liked in your community. And so
imagine that.
Yeah. And that's why we're here. That's why, we get some heat from time to time. I mean, we do the two things no one wants, right?
Yeah.
We collect money and we enforce rules. We understand that, but it's part of the need of the HOA to maintain those common areas and to maintain the HOA as a whole. Right. So just understanding the amount of time that actually will go into it from an accounting, bookkeeping perspective as well. And then also at the year end, making sure that, you're working with the tax accountant to get taxes filed and things like that. So, because you still have to file,
absolutely.
Even though taxes aren't owed on any. So just a real quick thing is HOA does not pay taxes on assessments coming in, but they do pay taxes on any interest income from, let's say you have your reserve study in a money market at a bank, which is a very smart thing to do. It accrues some interest. That way you're keeping fees down across the board, trying to maximize that money that you have there. But you're
going to pay some tax on that interest.
You're going to pay a little tax on it. And so all I'm saying is there's some tax forms and, deadlines. We all know taxes. So that's just the amount of time that actually goes into it on a monthly basis.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, guys, where can everybody find you?
Yeah. So we're located in Albany, Oregon, at 1107 Southeast 9th Ave in Albany, Oregon. You can also go to our website at www.hubcitymgmt.com, management abbreviated. and you can find us there. We have a list of like the HOAs that we manage and just kind of a overview of services we offer, not only in HOA but property management as well. You can send us a letter there, or fill out a form and send us an email as well. Yeah, our office email is office@hubcitypm.com, and our phone number is 541-259-1284. So just call and leave a message. Be happy to help.
We'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes when this goes on YouTube. So that way I'll make you give me all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, no. We'll keep that. I think it's good for people to hear it, you know, to know, but that way they can see it, click on it and have it for the future. So,
and we manage anywhere in Oregon. You know, we've managed up in Tigard, Portland area, Salem, Corvallis, Albany, Lebanon, Eugene. So, you know, if it's an HOA that needs our help, we'll definitely help you guys out. So,
love it. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, hey, thank you. Appreciate the time today. And guys, again, appreciate you tuning into our podcast here. We plan on having tons more guests like this. And if you have any questions about HOAs or builders or developers or anything like that, reach out to us and hopefully we can help you out. So until next time, we'll talk to you later.